Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with PKWARE and AWS on how to build and sustain ongoing PCI compliance with AWS and PKWARE. First of all, this is William Bailey, Director of Partner Marketing, and we are excited to offer this webinar to everyone and want to thank everyone for taking time in order to join today. Today we will have Chris Penn, who is the Vice President of Security and Privacy at PKWARE, delivering a portion of the presentation. And then we have Danielle Greshak, who is the Worldwide Director of ISV Partners for AWS, also joining today's webinar. I want to remind everyone of a few things. Number one, if you look over on the right-hand side, you can see a questions little tab. Feel free throughout today's webinar to ask any questions as you think of them and put them in the questions tab, and we will get to them hopefully by the end of today's webinar. And if we don't, we will have someone reach out to you with answers on the question that you asked. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Chris Penn, who will kick off today's webinar. And again, thank you for your time today of joining our webinar. Thank you. Chris?
Thanks, William. Thanks for that. Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Penn. As William mentioned, the VP of Security and Privacy here at PKWARE. Joining me today, I have Danielle Greshak from AWS's partner team, and we'll just be going through a few things today. One about data environments and how they're modernizing, some of the challenges, risks associated with that. As well as we step into the holidays, right? PCI is really top of everybody's mind, as well as those supply chain issues, right? That you see all the articles on the web about. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump into things here. It's a bit about myself. I've been in the industry well over 15 years at this point. I've worked at several of the world's largest retailers on their compliance privacy teams. I've worked at the government for over a dozen years, dealing with their various top secret projects. And then as it stands today, I'm working here at PKWARE as their VP of Privacy and Security. Danielle, want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. My name is Danielle Greshak, so I run the ISV Partner Solution Architecture team. I've been with AWS a little bit over 7 years. And basically, my team works with ISVs such as PKWARE to help them build joint solutions with AWS. Prior to AWS, I spent a lot of time in software engineering organizations, also worked with several e-commerce companies. So PCI was definitely, and payments were definitely something that I thought a lot about as well and worked on. And I've had 8+ years in cloud technologies. And I'm really excited to be here today with you.
Awesome, pleasure to have you, Danielle. Let's see. So oftentimes as you're going through these PCI, I'll call them projects. I mean, they're not supposed to be projects, but we all know typically it tends to fall that route. And every time you go through these PCI assessments and you obtain your rocks, there's always that conversation that seems to kick off year over year. Is how do we stop doing this? How do we get out of this panic project mode, and how do we get into more of a continuous compliance? How do we maintain this compliance that we've just achieved? And we'll go into that a little bit here. Like I said, about modernizing data environments, the risk, how do you raise data awareness? That's a big part of shifting to a continuous compliance model, is just being aware of what is happening, when, why, where, how. And then again, talking about what are some of the bells and whistles of continuous compliance, what do some of the requirements for that look like, and then we'll close out here with a couple of key suggestions, and as well as discussing some of what 4.0 is going to look like. We can't get into too many details just because the NDA surrounding it, but there are some changes coming that I think a lot of us are looking forward to. So what are some of the challenges that we see? Obviously especially now since the world of the pandemic, there's a lot of personal data. It's just growing monumentally, and a lot of organizations, they kind of talk about it being the oil to the business or the gold to the business, and that's true. So when you're thinking about modernizing your environments, whether it's moving from a mainframe of some sort to an SAP system, or maybe it's an on-prem data center to a cloud, right? Or heck, maybe it's one cloud to three clouds, right? I've dealt with clients in that situation. You really have to look at the data to determine what is going to move forward, what is not. And then the big question is, why are we moving it? Which is really a combination that you have to, not just your IT department and those various teams, but also your business departments need to get together and answer, why is this important, right? And a lot of times this is an exercise a lot of businesses don't, they're not used to operating in that manner. The next challenge here is there's a lot of complex systems. Again, if you're going from an on-prem environment, right, you could have mainframes or robust proprietary databases or semi-structured systems that your company has put together. If you're moving from one cloud to another, right, there's a lot of various proprietary systems out there. Again, it could be structured, it could be unstructured, it could be semi-structured, that's only offered in one cloud and not the other. So you have to start thinking about, well, how do we shift, or how do we lift data from one place to another, while still maintaining that access and the quality. And then the next one here, huge regulatory oversight. We talk a lot about PCI, and that's what we're going to drill into today. But I always like to tell folks, no two data sets are the same, and for that matter, the exact data set with two different use cases could have very different regulatory oversights. Meaning, if in the world of PCI, if you look at a credit card, a name, and a shipping address, well, that's probably shipping information or billing information, right? But if you look at those same three pieces of data and you put a privacy lens over it, well, now you've got CCPA, GDPR challenges, and all kinds of other stuff. So again, really understanding the why of the data is extremely important, because it's going to dictate how long do you have to maintain it, how long do you have to retain it, how do you have to protect it, who's at stake, right? Is it potential brand damage? Is it, depending on the regulation, is it potentially, imprisonment? So keeping all that stuff in mind while you're deciding what goes where is vital. The next one here is the very competitive market and consumer confidence. These two kind of get tied together. Just looking at the FinServe and the FinTech industries, right? And this applies to everybody, but especially those. You see these new apps, so the Robinhoods, the Forge, and all these other financial apps that are firing up. There isn't too much that separates a lot of these competitors from each other. What does separate them is their understanding of their consumer base and what their requirements are, what their needs are, how they're using the applications, where are they investing their time, and how are they doing it, as well as being informative on their privacy notices, their security notices, and the communication between the organization itself and their consumers. Having issues in any one of those departments, you could potentially disrupt that consumer confidence, whether it's as simple as a poorly updated privacy notice, or in the worst case scenario, it's a breach. Losing that consumer confidence, people will instantaneously switch. It won't take more than a few minutes to do it these days. So again, understanding all these challenges while still enabling the BI and analytics and all that stuff to go on and do it safely, again, I can't stress enough, is extremely vital, which kind of leads me into the next topic that I'll hand off to Danielle here. As organizations start to move into cloud spaces like AWS, one thing they have to keep in mind, just recently I looked at AWS's what is it, their compliance site, if you will, and they've got just hundreds of certifications from NIST to ISO to PCI to HIPAA. I mean, you name it, AWS is probably certified for it. But that doesn't necessarily mean your environment in AWS will meet all of those certifications. It just means that AWS is providing you with a toolkit that could meet them, right, if set up properly. So kind of that shared responsibility matrix is what we're going to jump into next.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So just as Chris was stating, there is, whenever you're going to build applications inside of AWS, there is a shared responsibility model that is at the core of thinking about cloud and building your applications on cloud. And I think you want to think about it this way. Essentially, the AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud, and anything that you build inside of AWS, your responsibility for that security in the cloud. And this is going to vary depending upon how you're going to build your applications. If you're going to use AWS as an infrastructure as a service, which I think, if you think about AWS 6, 7, 8 years ago, that is predominantly the way in which people built their applications inside of AWS. It was a lot simpler for us to state, right? We would just say, okay, we're responsible for everything from the hypervisor down, right? If anything there needed to be patched, we would take care of that. But if you were responsible for patching the operating system and also any kind of databases or anything you might run on top of that, making sure the data inside of those databases was secure, encrypted, etc. But over the years, as we've built more and more managed services, we are taking on more responsibility. For example, we have a data, a relational database service, RDS. So if you use RDS, you're going to be able to have us actually take care of patching the operating system, for example. You don't have access to that if you use that service. So that's kind of an example of where we actually end up taking on more. And if you're using, more of an API, again, we're responsible for making sure that API is secure, but any data that you might pass through that API is your responsibility. And where I see PKWARE really adding a ton of value, we work with a lot of companies that are building data lakes, lake houses on AWS, and just making sure that that data inside of those data lakes is classified, secure, encrypted, masked, whatever that might need to be for those that need to access that data. That is where our ISV partners really end up playing a big role in adding a lot of value to end customers, trying to navigate the challenges of running their applications on the cloud. Chris, any questions there?
Thanks for that, Danielle. Yeah, and you make a good point, right? Like, if you think about an application such as PKWARE, right? We're not the back end infrastructure, right? We ride on something provided. It could be a variety of stuff. It could be 2 or 3 different types of databases. Then you could have an application layer. But all of the back-end infrastructure is traditionally provided by our customers, who ultimately are, AWS customers per se, and they might be writing on, a SQL or an Oracle server that stood up out in AWS, or, and then those are usually leveraging, EC2 buckets or EMRs, right? But all of the security behind that, right, Danielle, I think would kind of be shared between PKWare's customer as well as AWS.
Yeah, like the security of, the physical security, making sure the servers are not, tampered. All of those types of things, making sure the APIs are secure and not being, any DDoS or anything like that against that. That is, of course, kind of what we're taking on. And of course, PKWare will be able to add value to encrypt and help customers encrypt and those types of things. Absolutely.
Awesome. And so moving on to the next one here, right? What is PKWARE, right? Might be a big question everybody's asking at this point. I'll summarize it for you. We'll dive in a little bit in some of the following slides. But holistically, what PKWARE is it's a platform with several capabilities. It all culminates around our data discovery capabilities, and you can use this in a variety of ways, right? It could be data governance, it could be data security, it could be data privacy. However, you determine that you want to best leverage this discovery. Maybe it's all three of them. We go all the way down to DSARs for CCPA, GDPR, etc. But in the likes of PCI, which there's a nice diagram coming up later in the presentation, we'll be able to tell you exactly where that PCI or that card data resides, whether it's encrypted, not encrypted. We'll be able to provide all those insights, and then we'll also be able to prevent it from creeping or growing into areas that your organization doesn't wish PCI data to exist. So you're going to hear a couple different, or you could hear me mention PKWARE or PK products through a couple of different names. You might hear me say PK Protect, which is the culmination. That's our product suite, which would include all of the sub products you see on the screen. So if you hear me talking about discovery or PK discovery, PK masking, encryption, you may hear all these things throughout the presentation. And again, these slide decks, or the slide deck, will be emailed over as a PDF after the webinar is completed. So I just wanted to give you a little walkthrough of what this all is. And again, as I said, our product really does culminate around discovery, which is where I always like to start with this. The simple reality of data awareness is that you can't manage what you can't see, right? And furthermore, even if you can see it, if you're not sure what quality the data is, are you looking at a test environment? You're looking at a dev environment? Are you looking at yesterday's environment, right? And so we can help you in all of those ways. But the big question comes back is where is my data? We talked about modernizing the environments and maybe shifting data from one location to another, and it could be a substantial shift. So understanding, is your data on-prem, is it in the cloud, is it, do you have a hybrid environment going on? PKWARE is going to be able to help you discover in all of those situations, and one instance of our software will be able to cover all of them as well. So you'll have a single pane of glass, so to speak. Copying and sharing of data, right? Again, going back to the work from home and the pandemic and all of that stuff, copying and sharing of data has, of course, always happened, but since working from home, it's just gone crazy. There's a lot more data making it to endpoints these days. Your DBAs, your sysadmins, etc. They all want to be able to do their job, and VPNs aren't always the most reliable, or maybe there's some licensing limitation or whatever it might be that's going on with that VPN. There's a lot of reasons why people are bringing more data locally. And PKWARE will help you from end to end understand, when I say end to end, I mean from like endpoint to server. It will help you understand who's copying what data and where that data resides, and if it's being cleaned up after its use case is finished. Multiple types of data, repositories, applications. I talked a little bit earlier about structured, semi-structured, or unstructured data. So maybe it's a database, maybe it's a data lake, maybe it's a file share, or it's somebody's desktop, right? Again, we work in all those areas. Kind of just jumping through the rest here. What really, comes of importance and highlights, especially as we go into the holidays, is this risky concentration and the risky combinations of personal data. If you have one database that has things like, I don't know, social security numbers, email addresses, maybe it's got health information in it. If you're a retailer, especially, there's always that side of pharmacy that goes on. You start having too much data in one place, right? It just risk starts to grow monumentally. the use cases start not to fit so well because you have duplications of that data in 15 other systems. So understanding when this type of situation begins to arise and being alerted on such activity is paramount so that your organizations can take the right steps to either prevent that from happening or take action to remediate it once it has happened. And it kind of leads me into the the risky combinations of data. Again, PCI mostly cares about financials, but as as we go to the holidays, we can't just think about PCI anymore. You have to think about all the various privacy laws, CCPA, the Virginia one, the Nevada one, the European GDPR, Brazilian LGPD, right? All these things come into mind. So when you're seeing things like a name in a street, credit card, billing or shopping history, all those items in one single place. Again, it's going to vary depending on your company or your organization, but what is that acceptable level of risk for the type of business that you're conducting? And it might be an exercise that you have to run through internally to see if that is acceptable. And then lastly here, I'll touch on the dispersed data of individuals, right? We were just talking about on everything being in one place. But again, what happens when you have somebody, use my name as an example, right? You have Chris Penn's data and you've got me in 14 different types of use cases, right? You have all these multiple avenues of business, and now my data is spread across potentially hundreds of different systems. Well, when I come in and I ask to see all of that data, right, you leveraging privacy rights, how do you ensure you get the correct Chris Penn from all 100 systems? And again, that's where PKWARE can help you out. So I'll talk a little bit about data discovery and its security requirements. On the left side here for discovery, when you're looking at solutions like ours, we do have some competitors out there in the space, but we kind of separate ourselves from them, through some of these categories. So when you're looking at discovery solutions, you want the solution to be intelligent, accurate, comprehensive, and scalable. And the whole reason, when you look at things like accuracy, and you're going to see, even ourselves and some of our competitors, a lot of people state, hey, we're 95%, we're 97%. If you ever see anybody say 100%, they're probably full of it. But we do pride ourselves on being one of the most accurate solutions out there. Keeping in mind that even that 1% of inaccuracy, right, could lead to a ton of false positives. So having the ability to tune and adjust the false positive rates so that it doesn't just become another DLP system, because we've all seen a dozen of those that go wrong. Right, being able to tune and adjust what is actually correct is something that a lot of discovery vendors don't necessarily provide, or they don't provide it well. We've been at this, over a dozen years at this point, and we pride ourselves on that. And then the other side here is effective protection, and it's not too often that you'll see a discovery vendor that also provides protection for the results that it's found. And the protection, right, you want it to be fast, flexible, consistent, and secure, meaning if you're going to encrypt or you're going to mask, or maybe you're just going to provide stronger ACLs, whatever the outcome might be, you don't want it to be extremely, resource intensive on the CPU or the memory. You don't want it to be intensive on the network, right? And again, the way that we do this is extremely lightweight, and it's highly adjustable. So you could secure an individual data element in an individual file in the case of unstructured, or in the case of structured, right, you could secure an individual column from a table if you'd like. So again, just wrapping up here around what it is our product does, but also just characteristics about products like ours in general. if you're out there in the space and you're shopping around, right, you want to make sure that you're not buying a solution that only works on Oracle, or it only works on SQL, or it only works, in this environment or that environment. You want these types of solutions to really offer you that single pane of glass. So operating across multiple platforms, regardless of where they're at and what kind of platform they are, um, that single pane of glass is going to be vital for these solutions to actually provide, value. Um, Again, kind of diluting some of the noise here, or getting rid of some of the noise in the market space. A lot of organizations talk about how they're AI or they're ML powered, right? Everything they do is ML, and I mean that's ML is great if you use it correctly, but if you're using ML for everything, you probably took a wrong turn somewhere. Um, Traditional regular expressions are great at finding data with strong structure. Credit card information is a perfect example of that. But where you can leverage ML, and where ML actually makes sense, are things like if you look at a shipping address, it's a perfect example, because they vary so much, not just from state to state, but substantially from country to country. And there's no hard you know, prescription or hard rule of, hey, the address has to fit this format. That doesn't happen. If you look at addresses in Brazil, or in the UK, or in Japan, or even in the US, even split between the US and Canada, right? Addresses can vary wildly. So leveraging, things like machine learning there to begin to teach the system that, hey, this is what addresses look like for our organization, based on where our customers reside. That ML can be extremely powerful. But if you're using it for things like credit cards or socials, etc., it's probably a poor use of it. And then reliably scanning data at scale. A lot of vendors will boast that they scan 100% of everything. And what that tells me is they kind of scan, 100% of very little, because scanning 100% of most people's data these days is not possible. A lot of organizations that we work with are in the, multi or tens, if not hundreds of petabyte level. Getting through all of that data is unrealistic. So, we like to leverage sampling, and then based on the sampling results, we can dive in deeper. And if needed, in a worst case scenario, we can do full scans. But typically speaking, that sampling will get the organization in the direction it wants to go. And I talked a little bit about tuning and adjusting the false positive, false negative rates earlier. So we'll skip through that one here. And then we'll jump into, again, circling back, getting away from the product a little bit, circling back to the business use case, the continuous compliance, right? How do you leverage solutions, whether it is a PKWARE or it's something else in your toolkit that has similar capabilities? How do you leverage those types of solutions to really empower or enable your business to get into this continuous compliance model, instead of paying that big four or that third party organization to come in every year on a contract and charge you way too much money to basically be staff add, if you will, in order to get through these major lifts. So you all may be familiar with this. You see it a lot in the realm of compliance. Danielle, I'm sure you see this day in and day out, even inside of AWS.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's all about, and again, whether this is PCI or it's just best practice, or it could be a random security practice that you have inside. But it's always, assess, remediate, report. That's always the continuous cycle that you see. And leveraging technology like PKWARE, where we're able to set up our discovery scans on whatever schedule makes sense. It could be daily, it could be weekly, it could be quarterly, and maybe that schedule will vary, right, depending on system, environment, etc. But that kind of alleviates or substantially assists with assessing what's going on. What data is where, right? We're going to be able to show you that. How much of the data is there? Again, we'll be able to tell you that. That kind of takes it down to, well, why do we have the data? And I don't think any technology out there today can really answer that. It's more of a human question. But if you know what data you have where, then you're properly armed to go have that conversation with the business and maybe even with some legal team or IT team, sorry, to go ask, well, why is this data there? Is it testing? Is it dev? Is it some new business, methodology or business that we're getting into? And you can be on the ball, if you will, and be in the know if you have these scans going on a pretty routine basis, which also leads into remediation, right? And here I have it written down as fixing vulnerabilities. But you could also, fix things like, data minimization, or, in the case of PCI, if you're finding credit cards in a system they should not belong in or they're not intended to be in, you can start asking the question up front, well, why is that there? Let me go investigate. And if you find out it's really not supposed to be there, don't know how it happened, don't know why it happened, then you can take, remediative or corrective action and either delete the data, or you could mask it, or you could encrypt it, all using our platform. Not investing in anything else outside of that. And then in the AWS world, Danielle, I'm not sure if there's other capabilities just beyond PKWARE as well, but uh, if memory serves me correctly, I believe there are toolkits out there.
Yeah, so one of the things that we definitely encourage our users to leverage is Security Hub, as well as all logs that are possible, creating almost like an observability platform, but using both our tools and our services, as well as in conjunction with your preferred ISV solution, of course, as well, just to get to your point that ability to know everything that is going on inside of your environment, right? So, we definitely have a lot of services out there in which we can find vulnerabilities, or perhaps data that's not in the right place, such as Macy and Guard Duty. And those are services that are probably worth looking into as well, but it's complementary, but definitely lots of choices out there for you to think about, like how can you lock down and do this continuous process that we have this picture here for, that assessment, that remediation, that report, to know exactly what's going on inside of your environment.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle, on that. That actually brings up a good point as well. With platforms such as ours, we have a a really good methodology for integrating and working with just about any platform out there, whether it's the likes of a data governance solution like a Calibra, or Relation, or name the other dozen of them. We could also work with workflow systems, which kind of goes into the next bullet here, reporting. We work with workflow systems like ServiceNow, again, to really enable that end-to-end auditing and workflow process, because remediation is great, but if you don't have documentation of why and how you fix things, right, when it comes time for assessments or audits, you could be in trouble. And again, so that culmination, the holistic view of where PKWARE in particularly can connect into all these different types of tool sets, really set you up for a great I want to say first step, I guess, or a great way to kick off your continuous compliance process, right? By having all these bells and whistles turned on. And here we'll spend a little bit of time on this diagram because I think there's a lot to unpack here. This is a solution overview essentially of one or two use cases in particular for the PKWARE platform. And right now I have this graphic drawn up to focus at the CDE, and for those of you not in the PCI space, CDE stands for credit card or credit data environment or card data environment. Sorry. Um, Essentially, it's where you know and are aware that, hey, we store PCI information in all of these places, right? Whether it's in AWS or it's in an on-prem system, maybe it's a mainframe, maybe you have this particular group or groups of people that store credit card information or may process credit card information across their tablets or their laptops, et cetera. And in totality, we call that the card data environment. This is what your QSA or your PCI assessor would come in and you tell them, hey, here's the world of credit cards as we know it. And they'll look at it and say, okay, well, based on that, then you've got to do these 300 controls or whatever it is. But what happens, because data is pretty much a living, breathing world at this point. What happens when those credit cards start to fall outside of that area that you just told the assessor you store them at, right? If the assessor catches wind of it, it's going to open up a whole different conversation and it's going to start bringing in doubt to that assessor that you've actually told them the truth, or perhaps not that you've blatantly lied to them, but it's certainly going to spread doubt to them that you actually have control of your data in the environment. So again, leveraging our discovery capabilities as well as various protection capabilities. If credit card data, not only would we scan your card data environment, but we would scan systems outside of the card data environment. So if you think about AWS, right, they lock things into VPCs, and you might have a dozen VPCs that you say, all right, this is my card data environment. But in totality, you might have 50 VPCs, right? And all of those other network sections, we'll call them, they might be for healthcare, maybe they're for HR, maybe all these different business reasons. There really isn't any purpose for a credit card to reside in any of those. So it wouldn't be in your card data environment, but it's still extremely important data. So it's very likely that you have PKWARE scanning those systems, looking for other elements. Maybe it's looking for, healthcare data, or it's looking for, names and addresses for privacy use cases. But you could also have it scanning for credit cards, knowing it should not find any, but in the event that we start picking up credit cards, we can alert you of it, right, and send a report out and with high priority on it, stating, hey, I found a credit card out here. I don't think it should be here. What corrective action do you wish to take, right? And you could mask it. And you want to jump in here, Danielle?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've worked in different e-commerce companies where, the assumption, of course, is that we are taking orders online through our website, but we'd also do a lot of business kind of either B2B or in which actually we were taking quite a bit of orders through more of a feeds data process, right, in the back end. And, things could be coming through, everything could be coming through different channels that maybe you as the IT administrator might not totally be aware of, but the product managers or the retailers on in your company are definitely looking for to leverage any channel that might exist. So yeah, like just making sure that every environment in which orders are being taken and credit cards would be captured, is definitely, I think, a key thing here. And Chris, you have here this data discovery icon too. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, as far as in the CDE? Because I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and the data discovery, as I mentioned with PKWare's discovery, right? We're not only looking for credit cards, which is kind of what this diagram would allude to. You can tune our product to find everything from credit cards to social security numbers to addresses to names, phone numbers. Uh, we've had organizations actually leverage us to look for blood types, right? You
That's
name it, we can
interesting.
find
That's PHI for sure.
it. Yeah. You name it, we can find it. And actually getting a little bit even deeper into the PCI weeds, right? We have a lot of financial institutions as customers, and if any of you have ever done any work in PCI, you know, storing full PAN beyond its transaction, a timeline, which is usually very short. Storing full PAN at rest is a big no-no. And we've been used in several places to help identify either when there's full PAN or maybe it's a CVV, right? A little 3-digit numbers being stored.
Yep.
We can detect all of those anomalies as well, because you want to remediate that as soon as it's found, right? You don't want that sitting around because of an assessor or an auditor, or God forbid a breach happens. You've kind of just provided all of the keys to the kingdom to that poor person's credit card information in your breach. It's bad enough when you get the last 4, the last 6, the last 8 of a credit card. It's really bad when they get your PIN and your CVV as well. And then again, outside of that boundary of where we know we're looking for things, we're also looking for other things. And so it's kind of a preventative measure, right? Think of it as a fence or boundary that, hey, we're aware that this particular type of data, right, whether it's a blood type or a credit card, we know that data is supposed to be in these 50 locations. But when I find it in the 51st location, I've got to start raising questions. And that's what we'll do here. Did you have anything to add here before you jump into the next slide, Danielle?
No, I think we're good here.
Okay. So coming towards the end of the presentation here, right? A big question at the top of everybody's mind. I actually did a podcast about this just recently. I'm not sure if it's aired or gone on the web yet, but if not, it will. And that is, what does PCI look like in the future? The standard as we know it today, 3.2.1, has kind of been around since I want to say 2012, 2013, and it hasn't been modified too much, and hasn't been updated, etc. And what is that? That's 7, 8 years. A lot has changed. There's been, the invention of Kubernetes and all these other platforms as a service. Cloud environments like AWS have exploded. And all the various services they provide. You asked me what an EC2 was 7 years ago. I couldn't tell you. But now it's like everything lives on these. So what's that done to the DSS is really kind of put some assessors and even some organizations, at their wits' end, because based on the requirements and how you're supposed to meet them, quite frankly, right now, when you look at some things like a PAS, right, or an IAS, it just doesn't fit. And so here you are with this mechanism, this solution that your business is, living and breathing on, in a requirement that just doesn't line up. So with 4.0, we know without a doubt those platforms are being brought into scope, but they're being brought into scope in such a way that actually makes sense. As well as the big one that everybody's talking about is this idea in 3.2.1, this idea of compensating controls, right? Which is where there is a requirement. It's written in such a way that you're supposed to meet it as written. But if you can prove that you've gone above and beyond in a different kind of way, but you still meet the intention of the control and you're able to document it, then in 3.2.1, they would call that a compensating control. And if you can get the assessor to sign off and agree to it, then you will pass that checkbox, if you will. In 4.0, some of that goes away. The idea of a compensating control is fading away. They're getting less prescriptive in how they want these controls met, and they're getting more open to, the intention. So if the intention is that you protect credit cards at rest, well, how you protect it is kind of up to you. I'm not saying that you can go out and just do, a 128-bit encryption and call it a day. The assessor will probably never agree to that. But if you come up with some creative way, or you're using some new startup solution or some in-house built solution, and if you're able to attest to that and show the assessor and build confidence with the assessor that, hey, you are meeting that control and here's how, right? Everything's documented and audited and logged and all that. Then you have met the intention of the control and you can move on to the next test. So that's kind of the big thing that's changing in 4.0 is the ways that you get to become compliant. Danielle, I'm not sure if I know you used to do some work in the PCI space. I'm not sure how in tune you are with it these days, but
Yeah.
have you heard anything to the likes, especially from the AWS side?
Again, we will be working to make sure that our environment, is meeting the future PCI compliance requirements for sure. I'm probably, to your point, not as in tune to working to make my environments PCI compliant as much as I have to be in the past. I'm not working with credit cards every day like I used to. But definitely, our goal is really to make sure that all of the things that are required for meeting PCI, endpoint protection, ability to encrypt both in transit and at rest, all of those capabilities are available for any applications that you're building inside of AWS.
Yeah, and I can't reveal too much again because of the NDAs and all of that, but what I can say is without a doubt, like there are a team of individuals at AWS. There's a team of individuals at the other cloud providers and a lot of the other large organizations, even ISPs, are all involved with the PCI Council at this point to ensure that their services and what they're providing to their customers as far as infrastructure goes are being considered for the future of PCI. Because again, these standards don't change often, and when they do, right, it's important that we capture everything in a kind of it's a point in time, right? So they want to make sure they can capture everything they can before we're kind of written into stone and we go off another dozen years before we see it the new standard. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but it's always the chance. Um, so with that, right, just circling back to what are the core focus areas for PKWARE and its solutions. We're not going to go back to the drawing board and re-engineer and redevelop everything. I mean, we have our roadmap and our focus on what our product is, going to be doing in the next, 3, 4, 5 years. But what we will be doing, especially with 4.0, it's similar to what we're doing today, only it's going to have even more fuel to help with your PCI assessment, if you will. So if you think about things like CDE scoping, aka that discovery, right, we're of course going to continue doing that. The boundary protection that we talked about, we're going to continue doing that. We're going to continue to grow it. And then getting into the PCI weeds, requirement 3 is all about protecting data at rest. Rather that is masking, right? That's a one-way, kind of messing up the data one way and you can't get it back. Or maybe it's encryption, right? At the column level or at the actual element level in a file. Requirement 4, PCI endpoint protection. So if you're thinking about your, various departments, laptops, desktops, phones, etc., we have agents for that can go out and encrypt or prevent people from accessing it based on their user group or user role. So restricting who can see it, we can do all of that. And then requirement 7 is all about again restricting who can see credit card data, whether they can see last 4, can they see full pan, can they, what can they see, what are they allowed to see based on their role. And we can do all of that today, and we'll continue to do that tomorrow. So wrapping up here, all right, kind of the key principles I always like to leave people with here. How do you scale data protection, right, and reduce, here I'm focused on ransomware, but how do you reduce risk in general? And if we're talking about continuous compliance, even that, right? How do you, scale data protection and build in continuous compliance? And that is be proactive versus reactive, right? Don't wait for something to happen. Expect something to happen and go out and do something about it. When you're planning, especially if you're in your compliance group or you're higher up in the IT security tower, when you're coming out with your data protection strategies, your data privacy strategies, again, look at the industry, look at what has happened, maybe not to your organization, but to other organizations, see if it applies to you, and be proactive in that. Just expect it to happen versus reactive. Kind of leads into the next point, right? Plan at the enterprise level, not the silo. We tend to get inundated, and this happened to me all the time at the previous retailer I worked at. The one who screams loudest obviously gets attention. Right? I think that's the way it goes in a lot of organizations. But try to pull yourself away from that. Look at the business as a totality and understand what is the objective of the business. What business lines are they trying to accommodate? What type of data is going to be universal? Right? Is it going to be PCI? Is it going to be GDPR, CCPA? Is it going to be names? Is it going to be healthcare information? Right? Think about all these things and start to build your strategies around that. And then as the squeaky wheel, as I said, the silo level, right? You have these one-off departments that are, hey, what about me? What about this? You can always make exceptions or make separate policies for them, but at least get the enterprise done. And then the next two bullets kind of going together, building in data discovery protection by default. You may hear this as privacy and security by design by default is another way that you may hear this. And then protecting the data from end to end, right? So really being aware again of where that data is, why it is where it is, and why does your business have it in the first place, and then protect it accordingly, whether it's endpoint encryption or it's a database or file protection or encryption. Again, it all goes back to being aware. So with that, unless you had anything to add, Danielle, I'm pretty sure that wraps it up for us today.
No, nothing to add there. Just that, data governance is something that AWS is very focused on, and making sure that we surface the right tools so that customers can have success with their data in the cloud is really a focus for us right now.
And with that, William, I think Anthony's on here as well.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions in chat we wanted to answer? I think we have about 6 minutes left here.
Yeah, we do have actually quite a few questions in the chat. So thanks to everyone for submitting your questions on this. Before we get to the questions, I certainly want to thank Chris and Danielle for their time today, certainly preparing this webinar, having a great conversation on PCI DSS compliance. So thank you, and certainly thanks to everyone who joined today's webinar and taking time to learn more about PKWARE as it pertains to AWS platform with regard to PCI and PCI DSS. So first question is, and I think this is for Chris, how can solutions such as PKWARE ensure they are always ready for the next regulation?
It's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier, we were looking at the little picture there of the card data environment and everything else outside of it. And Danielle made a point, right? Not only do we look for credit card information, we're looking for everything. And inside of our platform, you have a capability to actually create custom rules, or we call them policies, that'll be able to look for any data you wish. So if you have a custom customer number, let's say, and it's some gargantuan 20-character thing, you could build that policy inside of our platform, and we will go out and find that information, again with 98-99% accuracy. And then if you build in validation checks to that, if there's any of those that make sense, like a LUN check or a mod 10, or maybe there's some proprietary check that you guys have built internally, we can put that in our product as well to verify and assure that what we are finding is indeed what we're finding. And so when you think about, well, how does that help me in various regulations? depending on what world you're coming at this from, in the world of privacy, right? Everything that can be tied back to an individual is important. So that the world is kind of the oyster, so to speak. It could literally be anything, and we're there and prepared to help you find it.
Great. Our next question that we're going to quickly jump to, this will be for Danielle. How does AWS think about PCI and data governance?
Yeah, so again, we are, a PCI DSS level 1 service provider, and we can provide the information to any of our customers on exactly what it is, if you want to read the details of the compliance, what it is that is, what is in scope for that and what isn't. And then it really just goes back to that shared security model of understanding what AWS is responsible for when it comes to your PCI applications, PCI compliant applications that you build on top of AWS, and then what is our responsibility, and then what would be your responsibility, and where is that line. But also, we have in the last couple of years, inside of APN, which is the AWS Partner Network, we do have something called a competency program in which we really try to highlight the top ISVs and partners inside of different spaces. And data governance is an area in which we felt, with a lot of our enterprises out there thinking about data lakes, bringing more and more regulated workloads into AWS, not just PCI, but also, workloads that have healthcare information inside of them, HIPAA, et cetera. And we really wanted to highlight solutions that help with our customers trying to govern their data inside of AWS. And PKWARE is a member of that data governance competency. And that is just something that, we really want to help our customers be successful in bringing any and all workloads into AWS. And this is a key part of it.
Awesome. Next question, actually, we'll stay with Danielle, I think, here. What tools or help does AWS have around building PCI applications?
Yeah, so we actually have something called a quick start. So a quick start is a reference architecture that comes with cloud formation scripts that, through a one-click deployment would allow you to stand up this, gold standard reference architecture. And so, excuse me one second. My next call is ringing here. Yeah, so essentially this quick start would really allow you to deploy the standard PCI architecture. And then we have a guide as well that would help you along with an audit companion in order to build PCI compliant applications on AWS. So again, with your third-party tools and solutions, that would also be helpful. But I think that guide, that audit companion, as well as the quick start, can help you get started on the right course.
Excellent. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question here.
Yeah.
This will be the last one. So this is actually for Chris. Chris, can PKWARE help organizations on a multi-cloud or say hybrid environment other than just AWS, but different platforms and different solution offerings?
Yeah, absolutely. We have several clients today that have at least 3 or 4 different cloud providers they're global organizations, right? So AWS, Azure, Google, et cetera, they're all kind of the big guys as we know them all here locally in the States. But then as you start to get over to, Spain or other parts of Europe, things like Telefonica start popping up. And we have several customers that work across, all of them. And fortunately, PKWARE is in a unique position to where, depending on where your backend is, and depending on how you architect it, you could still have that same single pane of glass, right? Presentation layer, if you will, and have the ability to connect into all the various systems that live in all of your various environments, whether it's on-prem or in any one of those clouds.
Excellent. So we're going to wrap up here since we're right at the top of the hour. Thanks everyone again for joining today's webinar. As you can see in the chat, the presentation is in PDF form, and we will also send this out to you as well as a PCI DSS ebook that we worked alongside AWS with. We will send that out to everyone in the coming days. So thanks everyone for joining today's webinar, and we look forward to continued partnership with AWS and with you as well. Thank you very much. Have a great day.